The old Ford pickup groaned in protest as it climbed the narrow mountain road, shedding smooth asphalt for rough gravel like a snake shedding its skin. Max Reynolds kept a steady hand on the worn steering wheel, his knuckles white against the cracked leather. For the last hour, the world had been shrinking around him, the vast open sky reduced to a thin ribbon of blue between the dense canopies of ancient oaks and towering hickories. Here in the deep folds of the Appalachian Mountains, civilization felt like a distant memory, a chaotic dream from which he was finally awakening. Beside him sat Sentinel, motionless and alert. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, a magnificent animal whose coat was a rare silver gray that gleamed like polished metal in the dappled sunlight. His intelligent amber eyes tracked the passing trees, ears twitching at each unfamiliar sound of the forest. He was Max's anchor, the steady breathing presence that kept the ghosts of the past at bay. Max reached over, his hands settling on the thick fur of Sentinel's neck. The dog leaned into the touch, a low rumble of contentment vibrating in his chest. No words were needed. Their bond had been forged in the screaming case of a field hospital in Afghanistan and tempered in the quiet desperation of the years that followed. Sentinel understood the tremors in Max's hands before they started. Max understood the subtle shift in Sentinel's posture that signaled danger long before it appeared. At 35, Max wore the landscape of his past on his face. He was tall and lean, with the wiry strength that his faded flannel shirt couldn't hide. His brown hair, still cut in the military style he'd never abandoned, showed threads of silver at the temples. His face, weathered by sun and hardship, held a kindness in the eyes that hadn't been extinguished by what they had seen. 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Navy SEAL had earned him a chest full of medals, a permanent limp in his right leg, and nightmares that medication couldn't touch. The 4th tour had broken something deeper than bone or muscle. The mission had gone catastrophically wrong. 3 of his team died. Max had been the one to carry what remained of them back across a mile of mountain terrain, his own blood mixing with theirs in the Afghan dust. His hope, his last hope, was invested entirely in a piece of paper in his glove compartment, the deed to 40 acres of forgotten land in Ravenwood County, North Carolina. It had been a fluke, a property seized for back taxes and sold at a public auction online. The price was so low it seemed like a mistake. Max had poured the last of his disability pay and savings into the bid, his heart hammering against his ribs until the confirmation email arrived. 40 acres of trees, rock, and solitude. A place to build a wall against the world, not with bricks and mortar, but with silence and distance. The voice of Ryan Wilson, his former squad mate, echoed in his mind. "It's perfect for someone like you, Max. Middle of nowhere, quiet as a tomb. Previous owner was some tree hugger who couldn't hack it. County's practically giving it away." The gravel track ended abruptly in a small clearing. A simple single-story cabin stood before them, its wooden walls weathered to a soft silver gray, a stone chimney standing sentinel at one end. It wasn't much, but it was solid. It was his. "Well, boy," Max said, his voice raspy from disuse, "we're home." He cut the engine, and the silence that rushed in was absolute. It was a living thing, textured with the distant calls of birds and the whisper of wind through the pines. For the first time in years, the frantic noise in Max's own head seemed to quiet, subdued by the profound peace of the mountains. They spent the first hour walking the perimeter of their new kingdom. Max moved with a long, ground-eating stride, his worn work boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. His limp was more pronounced after the long drive, but the pain was familiar, almost comforting in its constancy. Sentinel trotted at his side, tail held high, his nose working constantly as he cataloged a library of new scents. The property was a perfect mix of rolling hills and dense woods, with a small, clear stream cutting through the southern edge. A natural spring bubbled up near the eastern boundary, the water so pure and cold it made Max's teeth ache. It was pristine, untouched, a sanctuary carved from wilderness. But as they approached the western boundary, a steep, wooded hillside that rose sharply toward a rocky outcrop, Sentinel changed. The confident trot slowed to a hesitant walk. His tail lowered, and the fur along his spine bristled slightly. He stopped dead, a low whine escaping his throat. "What is it, Sen?" Max asked, stopping beside him. He scanned the hillside, his eyes, trained by years of combat to spot anomalies. to see the thing that didn't belong, seeing nothing but trees and shadows. There was no sound, no scent on the wind that he could detect. Sentinel backed away a step, his ears flat against his skull. He looked up at Max, his amber eyes filled with a definite and unsettling anxiety. He would not go any further in that direction. Max had seen the dog face down armed insurgents and walk calmly through firefights that sent hardened soldiers diving for cover. This was different. This was a deep, instinctual rejection of the place. "Okay," Max said softly, resting a hand on the dog's head. "Okay, boy, we'll leave it be." He trusted the dog without question. If Sentinel said the hillside was wrong, then it was wrong. They turned back toward the cabin, but a sliver of unease had pierced the bubble of Max's newfound peace. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, Max started unloading the truck. He set a cooler and a box of supplies on the porch, the simple act of creating a home, sending a small current of satisfaction through him. Sentinel, having shaken off his earlier mood, was sniffing around the edge of the clearing, near a patch of overgrown weeds that might have once been a garden. Suddenly, the dog went rigid. His playful exploration ceased, replaced by a singular, intense focus. He lowered his head to the ground, his nose twitching rapidly over a small patch of dirt and sparse grass. Max paused, watching him. This was not the casual curiosity of a dog chasing a field mouse. This was the precise, methodical behavior of a highly trained animal on a scent. Sentinel began to whine again, a different sound this time, a high-pitched note of urgency. He looked back at Max, then back at the ground, and began to scratch at the earth with his front paws. Dirt flew as he dug with frantic energy, his entire body trembling with focus. Max set down the box he was holding and walked over, his boots crunching on dry leaves. "Easy, boy, what did you find?" Sentinel ignored him, continuing to dig, his purpose absolute. Max knelt, pushing the dog gently aside. He looked at the disturbed patch of ground. It was just dirt and roots, but Sentinel's insistence was undeniable. In all their years together, the dog's instincts had never been wrong. They had kept him alive more than once. A cold knot formed in Max's stomach, a familiar feeling he had hoped to leave behind forever. The perfect, silent sanctuary he had bought for a bargain already held a secret, and his partner was telling him that secret was buried right beneath their feet. He stood up and walked back to his truck. The silence of the mountains no longer felt peaceful, but watchful. He pulled a folding shovel from his gear. Whatever was down there, Sentinel was adamant it should not stay hidden. The shovel bit into the earth with a dull thud. Max worked with a steady, efficient rhythm, a cadence born from digging countless fighting positions in landscapes far less forgiving than this. Sentinel sat nearby, his body a tense coil of anticipation, watching every spadeful of dirt that was tossed aside. After a few minutes of determined digging, the shovel struck something hard with a jarring scrape of metal on metal. Not a rock. The sound was hollow, artificial. Max's breath caught. He knelt, setting the shovel aside and using his hands to clear the remaining soil. His fingers brushed against a cold, rusted surface. Carefully, he worked the object free from the grip of earth and roots. It was a small metal lockbox, no bigger than a shoebox, its surface pitted and brown with corrosion. It was surprisingly heavy, sealed tight by years of moisture. He carried it to the porch, Sentinel trotting silently at his heels. Using a pry bar from his toolkit, Max forced the rusted latch. The lid groaned open with a shriek of tortured metal. Inside, resting on a bed of what was once cloth, lay several items. A dog collar, its leather cracked and faded, the metal buckle green with age. A small leather-bound journal, its pages swollen and warped by damp. A military ID tag, and a USB drive, its plastic housing partially melted and warped. Max sat on the top step of the porch, the box resting between his boots. He picked up the military ID first, wiping away decades of grime. The name etched into the metal made his pulse quicken. Reed, Nathan J. The service dates showed the man had served in Afghanistan during the same period Max had been there. Next, he carefully examined the journal, its cover cool and slightly slimy to the touch. With a gentle thumb, he fanned the pages open. A musty smell of wet paper and decay rose from them. Much of the ink had bled, rendering many entries into illegible blue clouds. But near the middle, Some pages had been better protected. Max began to read the fragmented entries, piecing together a disturbing narrative. Discovered what they're really doing at the Crest facility. Not just chemical waste disposal, these are military-grade compounds, the same ones we saw in another page. Hayes knows I'm on to him. Saw him meeting with Crane at the Overlook yesterday. Too much money changing hands for a routine inspection. Took photos, hidden in, and further on, written with a frantic, heavy hand. They found my cameras. Had to run. Atlas is the only one I can trust now. If something happens to me, all evidence is hidden under the old oak with the lightning scar. God help anyone who uncovers what they've buried in these mountains. The last entry was simply, "They're coming." Max's blood ran cold. He looked at the dog collar again. The worn leather bore a hand-tooled name, Atlas. Nathan Reed had disappeared here on this property, and whatever he had discovered had likely gotten him killed. Before Max could process this further, the sound of an engine broke the forest silence. A white pickup truck with the official seal of Ravenwood County on its door was making its way slowly up his gravel driveway. It parked behind his own Ford, and a man in a crisp sheriff's uniform stepped out. He was in his mid-50s, a big man who filled out his uniform well. His hair was thick and silver white, his face a roadmap of sun and laugh lines. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who owned his space, and he wore a smile that was broad and welcoming. But as he drew closer, Max saw that the smile never quite touched the man's eyes, which were a pale, cold blue. "Afternoon," the man boomed, his voice friendly. "Just wanted to come by and welcome you to the county. Name's Hayes, Sheriff James Hayes." Max stiffened, the name from the journal burning in his mind. He subtly shifted his body, blocking the open lockbox from view. Sentinel, who had been lying down, rose to his feet in a single fluid motion. He didn't bark or bristle, but he stood at Max's side like a gray shadow, his body perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the newcomer. "Max Reynolds," Max replied, giving a short nod. "Appreciate you stopping by, Sheriff." "No trouble at all. We don't get many new folks out this far," Hayes said, his eyes scanning the property, taking in the cabin, the truck, and Max himself. "It's a beautiful piece of land, but it's got its stories, you could say." Max waited, his face impassive. "Old-timers say strange things happen in these woods," the sheriff continued, his tone shifting to that of a folksy storyteller. "Some say it's old Cherokee spirits. Others say it's the ghosts of moonshiners from back in the day. Strange lights, sounds on the wind when there's no breeze." He paused, studying Max's reaction. "The folks who owned this place before you, they were city people, left in a hurry. Guess the quiet was a little too loud for them." Max recognized the technique instantly. It was a soft probe, a psychological tool used to gauge a person's resolve, to plant a seed of doubt and fear under the guise of local lore. He'd seen it used by interrogators overseas. The intent was the same: to make the target uncomfortable, to discourage them from digging any deeper. The sheriff's friendly act was a warning. "I've heard my share of ghost stories, Sheriff," Max said, his voice level. "The quiet is what I came for." Hayes' smile tightened for a fraction of a second. He had expected a different reaction. "Well, that's good to hear," Hayes said. "Just thought I'd give you the neighborly heads up. It's best not to go poking around too much. Easy to get lost in these mountains." Throughout the entire exchange, Sentinel remained a silent statue of distrust. The dog never took his eyes off Hayes. A low, guttural vibration, too quiet for the sheriff to hear, rumbled in his chest. It was a growl felt more than heard, a clear and absolute signal of a perceived threat. Max rested a hand on the dog's head, the gesture both a command to stand down and a silent acknowledgement. "I see it too, boy." "I'll keep that in mind," Max said. As Hayes turned to leave, his gaze caught on something on Max's chest. "You serve?" Max nodded once. "Navy, SEALs." A flicker of something, recognition, concern, crossed Hayes' face. "Afghanistan?" "3 tours, plus some places they don't name." Hayes nodded slowly, his assessment of Max visibly shifting. "I was Army, Special Forces, spent some time over there myself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin. the kind military units exchanged as tokens of recognition. He flipped it to Max, who caught it reflexively. The coin was heavy, solid silver by the feel of it. One side bore the Army Special Forces insignia. The other side bore a stylized raven inside a hexagon. The exact same symbol Max had just seen sketched in Nathan Reed's journal, labeled Project Raven. "We might have more in common than you think, Reynolds," Hayes said, his voice lower now, more intimate. "Fellow warriors should look out for each other. Don't you agree?" Max handed the coin back, keeping his face neutral despite the adrenaline now surging through his system. "Appreciate the welcome, Sheriff." Hayes gave a final hearty nod. "All right then, Mr. Reynolds. You need anything, you know who to call." He turned and walked back to his truck, the friendly facade perfectly in place. Max watched until the truck disappeared down the driveway, leaving a trail of dust hanging in the air. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, charged with unspoken threats. The sheriff's visit had done the opposite of what he intended. It had taken Max's sliver of unease and forged it into the hard steel of certainty. Something was deeply wrong with this place, and Sheriff Hayes was part of it. Max looked down at the open box, at the journal, the collar, and the USB drive. Relics of the predecessor. Relics of a man who likely hadn't just left in a hurry. He picked up the journal, his mission now clear. He turned to his partner. "All right, Sen, let's find that tree." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees as Max and Sentinel searched. For more than an hour, they had walked a methodical grid pattern through the eastern section of the property, Max's eyes scanning the trunks of ancient trees, looking for the telltale scar of a lightning strike. He found dozens of oaks, some massive and ancient, their trunks wider than he could wrap his arms around. But none bore the distinctive mark mentioned in Reed's journal. Frustration pricked at the edges of Max's concentration. Sentinel seemed to sense his mood, staying close, his usual exploratory sniffing replaced by a quiet watchfulness. The dog understood the shift in their mission. This was no longer a peaceful exploration. It was a search for answers in a place that had already claimed one life. Just as Max was ready to call it a day and head back to the cabin, the sound echoed through the valley again. An engine, different from the sheriff's truck. A higher-pitched hum. Instinct took over. "Sentinel, heel," Max commanded in a low voice. The dog was instantly at his left side. Max moved silently behind the broad trunk of a poplar, his body melting into the shadows. His heart hammered a familiar, controlled rhythm against his ribs. The visit from the sheriff had put every nerve on high alert. He was exposed out here, and he had no idea who was coming or why. He watched as a dusty, dark green SUV bumped its way up the driveway and parked near the cabin. The engine cut, and the mountain's profound silence returned for a moment before a car door opened and closed. A woman emerged. She stood for a moment surveying the clearing with a sharp, intelligent gaze. She was perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore sturdy jeans, hiking boots, and a worn denim jacket, looking less like a casual visitor and more like someone who had come with a purpose. Her face was tense with a mixture of determination and weary sorrow. Max remained hidden, observing. He watched her walk up to the cabin's porch, her movements deliberate. She wasn't here by accident. When she raised a hand to knock, he decided to act. "Can I help you?" he called out, his voice firm. The woman startled, spinning around to face the direction of his voice, her eyes wide and searching. They finally found him as he stepped out from behind the tree. She didn't look scared, only surprised. "I'm looking for the owner of this property," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You found him," Max replied, not moving any closer. Sentinel remained at his side, a silent gray statue of potential force. "Not a lot of visitors out this way. First the sheriff, now you." The woman's expression hardened slightly at the mention of the sheriff. "I'm not here by chance, Mr. Reynolds, Max Reynolds. I'm Olivia Reed," she said, taking a few steps forward, her hands visible in a deliberate gesture of peace. "I've been monitoring the sale records for this property since my brother disappeared here a year ago." Max's guarded posture didn't change, but her words cut through his suspicion. Disappeared. The word hung in the cool air, far more ominous than the sheriff's folksy ghost stories. "Your brother was Nathan Reed," Max said. Not a question, but a confirmation. Surprise flickered across her face. You know his name? I found something. Max glanced toward the porch where the lockbox still sat. Come inside, we should talk. The cabin's interior was simple but sturdy. A main room served as both living area and kitchen, with a small bedroom and bathroom off to one side. The previous owner, Nathan Reed, had left basic furniture, a wooden table with 4 chairs, a sagging couch, and a pot-bellied stove for heat. Max set the lockbox on the table. Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the dog collar. She ran a thumb over the cracked leather, her expression a mixture of profound grief and fierce resolve. Atlas, she whispered. Nathan made this collar himself. He was so proud of the pattern. She looked up at Max, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He would never have left him. Never. That single heartfelt statement solidified their alliance more than any contract could. They were no longer just two strangers. They were partners in a search for truth. For the next hour, they hunched over the journal, carefully examining the fragmented entries. Olivia filled in the blanks of her brother's life. Nathan Reed had been an environmental journalist and activist. After serving in Afghanistan as a combat correspondent, he had dedicated himself to exposing corporate polluters. His investigation had led him to Crest Chemical, a company contracted to dispose of military waste. He was certain they were illegally dumping toxic chemicals in these mountains, Olivia explained. He bought this property specifically because it bordered Crest land. He was gathering evidence, water and soil samples, setting up cameras. She looked down at the journal, her finger tracing the handwritten notes. Then, about a year ago, he stopped responding to my calls. When I came looking, the cabin was empty. Sheriff Hayes told me Nathan had probably gone native, his words, abandoned civilization. He said it happens sometimes with city folks in these mountains. Her voice hardened. But Nathan's truck was still here. His laptop was gone, but all his clothes were still in the closet. And Atlas, her voice broke. He would never have left without his dog. Hayes came by earlier, Max said, watching her reaction carefully. Gave me the same story about the previous owner leaving suddenly. Warned me not to poke around. Olivia's face darkened. Hayes is involved somehow. Nathan mentioned him in his emails to me. Said the sheriff was suspiciously cozy with Crest executives. Max picked up the damaged USB drive. This might have answers, but it's pretty badly damaged. I know someone who might be able to recover data from it, Olivia said. A friend from college who works in digital forensics. But we'd need to get it to him in Asheville. Max nodded, then held up the journal. Nathan wrote about hiding evidence under the old oak with the lightning scar. I've been looking but haven't found it yet. Olivia's eyes lit up. I know that tree. Nathan showed it to me once when I visited. It's not on your property. It's on the Crest side, near the boundary. That's why you couldn't find it. Night was falling rapidly, the forest darkening around them. Max checked his watch. Too late to go looking now. We'll start fresh in the morning. I should go, Olivia said, standing. I've got a room at the Piney Ridge Motel about 20 minutes down the mountain. Max walked her to her SUV. As she was about to get in, he asked, Does Hayes know you're back in town? She shook her head. I've been careful. Used a friend's name at the motel. Paid cash. Good. Keep it that way. And Olivia, he hesitated. Be careful. Watch for tails. Don't take the direct route back to your motel. She nodded, understanding the gravity of his warning. I'm not naive, Max. I've spent a year investigating what happened to my brother. I know we're poking a hornet's nest. After she left, Max sat on the porch steps, the night settling around him like a cloak. Sentinel lay at his feet, alert even in rest. The dog's ears twitched at every night sound, the soft hooting of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Max turned the challenge coin Hayes had given him over in his fingers, studying the raven insignia. His mind raced with connections and possibilities. Hayes had served in special forces in Afghanistan. Max had been in the SEALs there at the same time. Nathan Reed had been a combat journalist covering the same theater. What had Nathan discovered in these mountains that connected back to Afghanistan? What was Project Raven and why was it worth killing for? The peace and isolation Max had sought now seemed like a bitter joke. He had fled here to escape his past, only to find it waiting for him buried in the soil of his sanctuary. As he readied for bed that night, checking the doors and windows out of habit, Max noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. The lockbox, which he'd left on the table, was now slightly askew. The journal was in a different position than where he'd left it. Someone had been in the cabin while they were talking on the porch. Max quickly swept the small space, looking for bugs or cameras. In the bedroom, he found it. A small listening device attached to the underside of the bedside table. Military grade. Expensive. He didn't remove it. That would alert whoever had planted it that he'd found it. Instead, he went about his evening routine as if nothing was wrong, talking casually to Sentinel about mundane topics like the need to fix the cabin's leaky roof. That night, Max slept lightly, his service pistol under his pillow, Sentinel alert at the foot of the bed. Outside, an unseen observer watched the cabin from the tree line, the red dot of a cigarette glowing briefly in the darkness before being crushed underfoot. The following morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp autumn day that painted the mountains in shades of fire. Max rose before the sun, his internal clock still set to military time. He made coffee on the propane stove and stood on the porch, watching the mist rise from the valleys below. Sentinel padded up beside him, pressing against his leg in silent support. The bond between them was unspoken but absolute, a connection forged through shared trauma and unwavering trust. As he sipped his coffee, Max spotted a flash of green through the trees. Olivia's SUV was making its way up the drive earlier than they had agreed. His instincts immediately went on alert. By the time she parked and got out, Max was waiting, his face grim. One look at her told him something was wrong. Her face was pale, her movements jerky with barely contained panic. "They slashed my tires," she said without preamble. "All four, sometime during the night." Max's jaw tightened. "Did you call the police?" A humorless laugh escaped her. "And tell Hayes? No, I had the motel owner call a tow truck. Said it was probably just drunk teenagers." "Did anyone follow you here?" She shook her head. "I was careful, doubled back twice, took the long way around." Max nodded, his mind racing through options. "We're on a clock now. They know we're working together. We need to find that tree and whatever Nathan hid there." They set out immediately, Olivia leading the way to the western boundary of the property. As they approached the area where Sentinel had refused to go the day before, the dog began to show signs of agitation again, whining softly and pressing close to Max's side. "He feels it too," Olivia said quietly. "Nathan said Atlas would get like this near certain parts of the property. He thought it might be something to do with the chemicals Crest was dumping, that the dogs could smell something we couldn't." They pushed on, crossing over onto Crest land. The forest here was older, denser, with massive trees that blocked much of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight beneath their canopies. The ground was carpeted with thick moss and ferns, giving the place an ancient, primeval feel. After about 20 minutes of hiking, Olivia stopped, pointing to a massive oak that stood slightly apart from its neighbors. Its trunk was at least 4 feet in diameter, its branches spreading wide to form a canopy that covered an area the size of a small house. And there, about 7 feet up the trunk, was a jagged black scar where lightning had struck years ago, splitting the bark and leaving a wound that had never fully healed. "That's it," Olivia said, her voice hushed with reverence. "Nathan's tree." They approached cautiously, scanning the area for cameras or sensors. Max circled the massive trunk, looking for any sign of disturbance at its base. There was nothing obvious. No freshly turned earth, no marker. "The roots," Olivia suggested. "Maybe between the roots." They began to search the gnarled root system that spread out from the base of the tree like the tentacles of some ancient creature. After several minutes of careful examination, Sentinel suddenly barked. A sharp, authoritative sound. He had found something. The dog was pawing at a spot between 2 massive roots on the north side of the tree. There, partially hidden by moss and leaf litter, was a small metal container, similar to an ammunition box but smaller, painted in camouflage patterns. It had been wedged tightly between the roots and covered with natural debris, invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. Max carefully extracted it, checking for wires or triggers that might indicate a trap or alarm. Finding none, he opened the latch. Inside was a sealed, waterproof bag containing a notebook, a set of maps marked with locations, a flash drive, and several vials of what appeared to be soil and water samples. Each was meticulously labeled with dates and GPS coordinates. "Nathan's evidence," Olivia breathed, her eyes wide. He really did find something. Max was about to respond when Sentinel's demeanor changed abruptly. The dog's ears pricked forward, his body tensing. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Someone was coming. Max quickly closed the box and tucked it into his backpack. He motioned for Olivia to be silent, then pointed to a dense thicket of rhododendrons about 30 yards away. They retreated into the underbrush just as voices became audible. Two men in Raven Crest security uniforms emerged from the trees, following a dirt path that Max hadn't noticed before. They were talking casually, rifles slung over their shoulders, not the attitude of men actively searching for intruders. "Told Hayes we need more coverage on the North Ridge," one was saying. "Those new sensors keep malfunctioning in the rain." "Hayes is too busy playing sheriff to care about our security concerns," the other replied, "unless it affects his paycheck." They passed within 20 feet of Max and Olivia's hiding place, continuing down the path without noticing them. Sentinel remained perfectly still, his training overriding his instinct to alert. Once the security patrol was out of earshot, Max and Olivia slipped away, taking a different route back to the property line. "Regular patrols," Max noted grimly, "and they mentioned sensors. This place is more secure than they want it to appear." They also confirmed Hayes is on Raven Crest's payroll, Olivia added, just like Nathan suspected. They made it back to the cabin without further incident. Inside, with the door locked behind them, they spread the contents of Nathan's cache on the table. The notebook contained detailed observations of water quality tests, soil samples, and wildlife counts. Nathan had documented a systematic decline in the ecosystem. Dead fish in the streams, birds missing from areas where they should be abundant, plants showing signs of chemical burns. The maps were even more revealing. Nathan had marked what he believed were dump sites, places where Raven Crest was illegally disposing of chemicals too toxic or dangerous to process through legal channels. But it was the flash drive that held the most damning evidence. Olivia connected it to her laptop, and they watched in stunned silence as Nathan's investigation unfolded before them. There were photos of trucks moving at night, carrying unmarked containers, videos of men in hazmat suits dumping barrels into freshly dug pits, chemical analysis reports showing compounds that should never be present in nature, byproducts of military weapons development. And most disturbing of all, there were photos of Hayes, in civilian clothes, meeting with a distinguished-looking older man at various locations around the county. In several photos, metal cases were changing hands. "That's General William Crane," Max said, pointing to the older man. "He was high up in Army intelligence. I saw him once during a briefing in Kandahar." What would he be doing with Hayes in backwoods, North Carolina, Olivia wondered. The answer came in the final folder on the drive, labeled simply Raven. It contained classified documents, clearly illegally obtained, about a project the military had undertaken in Afghanistan. Project Raven had been developing a new class of chemical weapons, compounds that could incapacitate or kill without leaving traces detectable by standard equipment. The project had been officially shut down after concerns about ethics and legality, but according to Nathan's notes, it had simply gone underground, with testing continuing in secret facilities around the world, including one hidden deep in the mountains of Ravenwood County. "My God," Olivia whispered, "they're not just dumping waste. They're continuing the experiments here. And Hayes is their local protection," Max added, the pieces falling into place. "That's why he was so quick to dismiss your concerns about Nathan, why he came to warn me off on my first day." "We need to get this to the FBI," Olivia said, her voice strengthening with resolve. "This is way beyond local authorities." Max was about to agree when Sentinel suddenly leapt to his feet, a deep, warning growl emanating from his throat. He was staring at the window, his hackles raised. Max moved silently to the side of the window, peering cautiously around the edge of the curtain. There, parked at the end of the driveway, was a Ravenwood County Sheriff's cruiser, and walking up toward the cabin was a young deputy, his hand resting casually on his holstered sidearm. "Hide the evidence," Max whispered urgently to Olivia. "Then follow my lead." As Olivia quickly gathered the materials and disappeared into the bedroom, Max schooled his features into a mask of casual curiosity. He opened the door just as the deputy was about to knock. "Can I help you, deputy?" Max asked, his voice neutral. The young man, he couldn't have been more than 25, seemed momentarily taken aback by Max's proactive approach. He recovered quickly, straightening his shoulders. "Deputy Frank Martinez, Sir Brun," he said, his voice carrying a slight Hispanic accent. "Sheriff Hayes asked me to check in on you. Make sure you're settling in all right." Max raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe in a deliberately relaxed posture. "That's mighty neighborly of the sheriff. I just saw him yesterday." Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, sir, he mentioned that. Said you might need some assistance with local services, getting utilities set up and such." It was a thin excuse, and both men knew it. Max studied the deputy more closely. Unlike Hayes, whose eyes had been cold and calculating, Martinez's held a hint of uncertainty, perhaps even conflict. "Well, I appreciate the thought," Max said, still blocking the doorway, "but I'm all set for now." Martinez nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, he lowered his voice. "Sir, I'd recommend being careful about the company you keep around here. Small town, people notice things, like out-of-town visitors." The warning was clear. They knew about Olivia. "I'll keep that in mind," Max replied evenly. "Anything else?" Martinez hesitated, glancing back at his cruiser, then leaning in slightly. "The walls have ears in Ravenwood County, Mr. Reynolds, and the mountains have eyes, if you understand my meaning." Before Max could respond, the deputy straightened up, resuming his official demeanor. "You have a good day now, sir. Call the station if you need anything." Max watched as Martinez returned to his cruiser and drove away, his mind racing to interpret the deputy's cryptic warning. It hadn't sounded like a threat, more like a caution from someone who might not be fully aligned with Hayes. He closed the door and turned to find Olivia standing in the bedroom doorway, her face pale. "They know I'm here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Max confirmed, "but something's off with that deputy. He was warning us, not threatening us." "Can we trust him?" "I don't know, but right now we can't trust anyone." Max ran a hand through his hair, thinking rapidly. "We need to move fast. They're closing in." Olivia nodded, her resolve visibly hardening. "My friend in Asheville, the one who can recover data from the damaged USB, we need to get to him. Today." "Agreed. But they'll be watching the roads, and your car's out of commission." "So we use yours," Olivia suggested. Max shook his head. "Too obvious. They'll have the make and model. No, we need another way out of here." He paced the small confines of the cabin, his military training kicking in. When under surveillance, change the parameters. Do the unexpected. "The maps," he said suddenly. "Nathan's maps. Did they show any trails that might lead off the mountain? Something that doesn't use the main roads?" Olivia's eyes lit up with understanding. She retrieved the maps from their hiding place, spreading them on the table. Together, they pored over Nathan's meticulous markings. "Here," Olivia said after a moment, pointing to a thin line that snaked down the eastern slope of the mountain. "Nathan marked this as an old logging trail. It's overgrown, but it eventually connects to County Road 27. We could hike down, then call for a ride once we're off the mountain." Max nodded, his decision made. "Pack only what's essential. We leave in 30 minutes. As Olivia gathered their evidence and a few necessities, Max went outside under the pretext of checking his truck. Instead, he circled the cabin, looking for signs of surveillance. He found what he was looking for on the corner of the roof, a small camera disguised as a knot in the wood, with a clear view of the driveway and front door. They were being watched, just as he suspected. Back inside, he wrote a note on a piece of paper. "They're watching, cameras on cabin. We'll leave through the back into the woods. Talk normally about going to town for supplies." Olivia read it, her eyes widening, then nodded in understanding. She crumpled the note and tossed it into the stove. For the next 10 minutes, they put on a show for the hidden microphones, discussing a trip into town for groceries and hardware supplies. Max mentioned casually that they'd leave in an hour or so after he fixed a loose board on the porch. In reality, they were ready to go immediately, with backpacks containing the evidence, some water, and basic survival supplies. They slipped out the back window of the bedroom, the one blind spot in the camera's coverage. Once in the trees, they moved quickly but carefully, following the logging trail marked on Nathan's map. Sentinel took point, his keen senses alert for any sign of pursuit or danger. The descent was arduous. The old logging trail had been reclaimed by nature, overgrown with brush and blocked in places by fallen trees. But it was passable, and more importantly, it was unlikely to be monitored. They had been hiking for about 2 hours when Sentinel suddenly froze, his ears pricked forward. A low warning growl rumbled in his throat. Max signaled for Olivia to stop and be silent. They stood motionless among the trees, listening. At first, there was nothing but the natural sounds of the forest. Then they heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of dogs barking. Search dogs. "They've figured out we're gone," Max whispered, "and they're tracking us." Olivia's face paled. "How long do we have?" "Not long enough." Max looked around, assessing their options. "We need to split up." "What? No. Listen to me." Max cut her off, his voice urgent but controlled. "You have the evidence. You need to get to Asheville. I'll create a diversion, lead them away from your trail." "They'll catch you," Olivia protested. "Maybe, but Sentinel and I are pretty good at not being found when we don't want to be." His lips curved in a grim smile. "It's what we were trained for." The barking was getting louder. They had minutes, not hours. "There's a stream about half a mile ahead, according to the map," Max continued. "Follow it downstream for a quarter mile, then get back on the trail. The water will help mask your scent." Olivia looked torn, clearly hating the idea of separation but understanding the logic. Finally, she nodded. "Where do I meet you?" "Your friend's place in Asheville. Text the address to this number." He handed her a prepaid phone from his pack. "It's clean, no connection to either of us. I'll contact you when I can." "Be careful," she said, impulsively squeezing his arm. "You too. Now go." As Olivia disappeared down the trail, Max turned to Sentinel. "Ready to play some games, boy?" The dog's ears perked up, recognizing the tone that meant they were going into operation mode. Max quickly retrieved a small container from his pack, a special blend of herbs and animal scents designed to confuse tracking dogs. He dabbed some on his boots and on Sentinel's paws. Then, with deliberate movements, he began to create a false trail, heading west instead of east, away from Olivia's path. He moved quickly, making sure to leave clear signs of passage, broken twigs, disturbed leaf litter, even a dropped handkerchief. It was a trail even a novice tracker could follow, which was exactly the point. After a quarter mile, he veered sharply north, using rocky ground to minimize tracks. Then he doubled back, using a fallen log as a bridge over his previous trail, eliminating scent overlap. The barking was closer now, joined by the shouts of men. Hayes had mobilized a serious search party. Max picked up his pace, Sentinel matching him stride for stride. They weren't running away, they were running toward. Their path would take them in a wide arc, eventually circling back toward Raven Crest property, the last place Hayes would expect them to go. Because sometimes the best place to hide was right under the enemy's nose. As dusk began to fall, Max found himself on a ridge overlooking a part of the Raven Crest facility he hadn't seen before. Unlike the main plant, visible from the county road with its gleaming corporate sign, this section was hidden deep in the property, surrounded by thick forest. A chain-link fence topped with razor wire encircled a cluster of low, windowless buildings. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and security cameras swiveled on tall poles. It looked more like a military installation than a chemical plant. Max lay flat on his stomach, using his binoculars to study the facility. Sentinel remained perfectly still beside him, his training making him silent and invisible in the growing shadows. "What are they hiding in there, Sen?" Max whispered. As if in answer to his question, a large cargo truck rolled through the security gate, stopping at the loading dock of the largest building. Men in hazmat suits emerged, carefully unloading what appeared to be metal containers similar to the ones in Nathan's photos. Max focused his binoculars, trying to make out any markings on the containers. There, stenciled on the side of one, was the same Raven and hexagon logo that had been on Hayes' challenge coin. Whatever Project Raven was, its heart was beating inside that facility. The sound of breaking branches behind him jerked Max from his observations. Someone was coming up the ridge, and they weren't being careful about it. Max quickly packed his binoculars and slipped deeper into the underbrush, Sentinel following silently. They hadn't gone more than 20 yards when a voice called out, "Reynolds, I know you're up here. I'm alone. I need to talk to you. Max froze. It was Deputy Martinez. I'm not with Hayes, the voice continued. I want to help you. It's about Nathan Reed. Max hesitated, weighing his options. It could be a trap, but if Martinez had wanted to capture him, why announce his presence? Why come alone? I've only got a few minutes before they realize I've broken away from the search party, Martinez called, his voice tinged with urgency. Please, I have information you need. Max made his decision. Sentinel watch, he whispered, giving the command that would set the dog on alert for any signs of deception or aggression. He stepped out from behind a massive pine, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. That's far enough, Deputy. Martinez stopped, raising his hand slightly to show he was no threat. Thank you for trusting me enough to show yourself. I don't trust you yet, Max replied. Talk. Hayes sent me to your cabin this morning to bug it, not to check on you, Martinez said bluntly. I was supposed to plant more devices, but I warned you instead. I've been trying to gather evidence against Hayes and Ravencrest for months. Why? Max asked, still wary. My sister lived in the valley below the plant. She died 2 years ago, rare form of cancer. The doctors couldn't explain it, but there were others in her neighborhood with similar symptoms. Martinez's face hardened. Ravencrest denied any connection. He said their operations were completely safe, and you didn't believe them. I started looking into it quietly. That's when I met Nathan Reed. He was already deep into his investigation. He showed me things, documents, water samples, wildlife deformities, proof that Ravencrest was dumping chemical waste into the watershed. What happened to Reed? Max asked the question that had been hanging over everything since he'd found the lockbox. Martinez's expression darkened. Hayes happened. He caught Nathan photographing a late-night dumping operation. 3 days later, Nathan disappeared. Hayes told everyone he'd abandoned the property, gone back to the city. But I saw Hayes and 2 Ravencrest security men at Reed's cabin that night. They were carrying something heavy wrapped in plastic. The implication was clear. Nathan Reed was dead. Why are you telling me this now? Max demanded. Because Hayes is calling in reinforcements. He's panicking. Says you and Reed's sister have found something big. Martinez's eyes were intense. Whatever it is, it's got Hayes and the Ravencrest executives running scared. And when men like that get scared, they get dangerous. What about Olivia? Are they tracking her too? Martinez nodded grimly. 2 teams, one following you, one on her trail. But they're expecting you both to head down the mountain. No one's looking back toward Ravencrest land. Why should I believe you? Martinez reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. This was Nathan's. Hayes thought he'd collected all of Reed's materials, but I found this hidden in his truck before it was impounded. It's got locations, dates, names, including who at the FBI he was planning to contact. He held it out. Max didn't move to take it. Leave it on that stump, Max said, gesturing with his chin. Then back away. Martinez complied, setting the notebook down and retreating several steps. Max approached cautiously, keeping his eyes on the deputy while Sentinel maintained his alert stance. He picked up the notebook and quickly flipped through it. It matched the handwriting in the journal he'd found in the lockbox. There's one more thing you should know, Martinez said. Hayes has called in General Crane. He's flying in tonight. Whatever you and Ms. Reed found, it's big enough to bring out the top brass. Why are you helping us? Max asked, finally tucking the notebook into his pocket. Because someone has to stop them, Martinez said simply, and I can't do it from the inside anymore. They're starting to suspect me. A distant shout echoed through the trees, followed by the renewed barking of dogs. They're coming, Martinez said urgently. I have to get back to the search party or they'll know I tipped you off. Head northwest. There's an old mining cabin about 3 miles from here. It's not on any maps. Reed used it sometimes. You should be safe there for the night. What about Olivia? Max asked. If she follows the logging trail, she'll make it to the county road. I've got a friend who runs a tow service. I'll make sure she gets to Asheville safely. Max studied the young deputy, weighing his sincerity. There was a genuineness to his grief and anger that was hard to fake. Why did you become a deputy if you suspected Hayes was corrupt? Max asked, the final piece that didn't fit. To find out what happened to Nathan Reed, Martinez answered, and to get justice for my sister. Another shout, closer this time. Go, Martinez urged. Northwest, old mining cabin. I'll try to steer them east. With a final nod of thanks, Max melted back into the forest, Sentinel at his side. As they made their way through the darkening woods, the sounds of pursuit gradually faded behind them. Martinez had given them a chance. Now they needed to use it to expose the truth about Crest and bring Hayes to justice. But deep in his gut, Max knew that what they had uncovered went far beyond illegal dumping or local corruption. Project Raven was something bigger, something with national security implications. And men like General Crane didn't fly into backwoods counties for minor cleanup operations. Whatever Nathan Reed had died for, it was only the tip of a very dark iceberg. The night closed in around them as they pushed deeper into the forest, the shadows hiding secrets older than the mountains themselves. The old mining cabin loomed before them, a dark silhouette against the star-filled night sky. It was little more than a one-room shack, its timber walls weathered to silver gray by decades of mountain storms. A half-collapsed stone chimney stood sentinel at one end, and the tin roof was pitted with rust and age. Max approached cautiously, Sentinel ranging ahead to check for threats. The dog circled the perimeter, nose to the ground, then returned to Max's side without alerting. The cabin was empty. The door creaked open at Max's touch, revealing a space that was Spartan but clearly used recently. A cot with a sleeping bag occupied one corner. A camp stove sat on a makeshift table, alongside a metal footlocker. A battery-powered lantern hung from a ceiling beam. Nathan's hideout, Max murmured, taking in the sparse furnishings. He lit the lantern, casting the cabin in a warm yellow glow. Sentinel patted in, his nails clicking on the wooden floor as he performed a thorough inspection of the small space. Max examined the footlocker first. It was secured with a padlock, but a swift strike with the butt of his knife broke it open. Inside were more of Nathan Reed's possessions: clothes, a first aid kit, several notebooks, and a topographic map of the entire mountain range, more detailed than any commercial map. But it was what lay beneath these items that caught Max's attention. Wrapped in oilcloth was a satellite phone and a handgun, a Glock 19, standard military issue, with 2 full magazines. Nathan had been prepared for trouble, perhaps even expecting it. Max checked the satellite phone. The battery was dead, but a solar charger lay beside it. It would take hours to get enough charge for a call, but it was a lifeline if they needed it. As he continued searching the cabin, Max found a loose floorboard under the cot. Prying it up revealed a small waterproof case containing a thumb drive and a leather-bound journal, much newer than the one he'd found in the lockbox. Max opened the journal to the last entry, dated just 3 days before Nathan's disappearance. Confirmed my worst fears today. Project Raven isn't just about weapons development. The chemicals they're dumping aren't just manufacturing waste, they're failed test compounds. And they're testing them here on American soil. The deformities in local wildlife, the cancer clusters in the valley, they're all part of an ongoing field test. Hayes knows exactly what's happening. He's not just taking bribes, he's an active participant. His special forces background makes him the perfect local asset for Crane. Most disturbing discovery yet: found personnel records in an unlocked office during my infiltration. They've been recruiting homeless veterans from VA hospitals in 3 states, offering them and housing at a special facility. Once here, they're subjected to chemical exposure under the guise of clinical trials for new medications. Those who get sick disappear. Death certificates list natural causes. This is beyond environmental crime. This is human experimentation. I'm going to the FBI tomorrow. If anything happens to me, all evidence is at the oak tree in the cabin. May God forgive this country for what it's doing to its own people. Max closed the journal, a cold fury building inside him. This wasn't just about illegal dumping or corporate greed. It was methodical, calculated evil. The kind he'd seen overseas but never expected to find in the mountains of North Carolina. He thought of his own squad mates who died in Afghanistan. Had they been unknowing test subjects too? How far did this conspiracy reach? Max's phone vibrated, a text on the prepaid phone he'd given Olivia. Made it to Asheville, friend recovering data from USB. Something big. Call this number when safe. Relief washed over him. At least Olivia had escaped. Now he needed to find a way off this mountain and reunite with her in Asheville. But first, he needed rest. He'd been on the move for nearly 18 hours, adrenaline only carrying him so far. Max secured the cabin as best he could, putting Sentinel on guard at the door while he caught a few hours of sleep on the cot. His dreams were fragmented, violent. Flashes of Afghanistan mixed with images of Hayes and Nathan Reed and faceless veterans dying in hospital beds. He woke before dawn, instantly alert, Sentinel's soft whine pulling him from sleep. The dog was at the window, ears forward, body tense. Max moved silently to the window, peering out into the pre-dawn gloom. At first, he saw nothing. Then, a flash of movement, a figure moving between trees about 100 yards downslope. Then another. They'd found the cabin. Max gathered his gear with practiced efficiency, stuffing Nathan's journal and the thumb drive into his pack. He checked the Glock, chambered a round, and tucked it into his waistband. "Back door," he whispered to Sentinel. There had to be another way out. He found it behind a stack of firewood, a narrow door leading to what had once been a storage shed. Now it opened directly into the forest, offering a path of escape but away from the approaching figures. Max and Sentinel slipped out just as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. They moved quickly through the underbrush, paralleling a small stream that tumbled down the mountain. Behind them, Max heard the muffled sounds of the cabin being breached. Hayes's men had arrived. They'd gone perhaps half a mile when the crack of a rifle shot split the morning silence. A bullet whined past, thudding into a tree trunk just feet away. "Down," Max commanded, dropping flat behind a fallen log. Sentinel pressed against the ground beside him, perfectly still. Another shot. Closer this time. They'd been spotted. Max gauged distances, angles, options. The stream beside them cut through a ravine about 50 yards ahead. If they could reach it, the steep banks would provide cover. "Sentinel, with me," he whispered, then broke into a run, zigzagging between trees. Two more shots rang out, neither finding their mark. Max slid down the embankment into the ravine, Sentinel right behind him. The stream was shallow but fast-moving, the water ice-cold against his boots as they splashed downstream. The ravine deepened, its walls rising 10, then 20 feet above the stream bed. They were protected from rifle fire now, but also trapped. The ravine was a natural channel, and their pursuers would know exactly where they were headed. After a quarter mile, Max spotted what he needed, a game trail leading up the ravine wall. He and Sentinel scrambled up, emerging onto a flat shelf of rock overlooking the stream. From here, they could see two men in Raven Crest security uniforms moving cautiously along the ravine edge, rifles at the ready. Max held Sentinel close, keeping absolutely still as the men passed beneath their position. When they were out of sight, he led the way upslope, away from both the ravine and the mining cabin. By mid-morning, they'd put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers. The forest had thinned as they climbed higher, offering occasional views of the valley below. From one vantage point, Max could see the Raven Crest facility in the distance, its cluster of buildings now active with vehicles and personnel. "Something's happening down there," he murmured to Sentinel. "They're mobilizing." The satellite phone in his pack was now charged enough for a short call. Max found a secluded spot and dialed the number Olivia had sent. She answered on the first ring. "Max, are you okay?" "For now," he replied, keeping his voice low. "Had some visitors at the cabin. Had to move out quickly." "I've been so worried," Olivia said, relief evident in her voice. "Martinez's friend got me to Asheville safely. We've recovered data from both USB drives, and it's worse than we thought." "I know. I found Nathan's second journal. He documented human experimentation, Olivia. They're testing chemical weapons on homeless veterans." Her sharp intake of breath carried clearly over the line. "The data confirms it. There are medical records, death certificates, transfer orders. My friend says it's the biggest violation of the Nuremberg Code on U.S. soil since the Cold War." "Have you contacted the FBI?" "That's the problem," Olivia said, her voice tightening. "My friend tried his contact at the Bureau. The agent he spoke to told him to sit tight and not share the information with anyone. Said they'd send someone to collect the evidence. And no one came. Instead, two men in suits visited my friend's neighbor, asking questions about him. They weren't FBI, Max. They showed Department of Defense credentials." Max's blood ran cold. The cover-up goes higher than Hayes or Ravencrest. All the way to the Pentagon, if General Crane is involved, Olivia confirmed. We can't trust normal channels. Do you still have Martinez's number? We need to warn him. I tried calling earlier, no answer. Max cursed under his breath. They might have him already. Listen, Olivia, you need to get that evidence to someone who can break this story wide open. Someone with enough public profile that they can't be silenced. I've been thinking about that. I have a contact at the Washington Post, a senior investigative reporter. She broke a story on military contractor fraud last year. If anyone can handle this, she can. Good. Send her everything. But don't meet her in person yet. Stay hidden. What about you, Olivia? Olivia asked. How are you getting off the mountain? Max looked at the map he'd found in Nathan's footlocker. There's an old fire road on the north side. If I can reach it, I can make my way down to Highway 28. Can your friend send someone to pick me up? I'll arrange it. Be careful, Max. Hayes has called in state police backup, claiming you're a dangerous fugitive, wanted in connection with Deputy Martinez's disappearance. Max's stomach dropped. Martinez is missing? That's the official story as of an hour ago. They're saying you attacked him during a routine check. They're setting me up. Classic playbook. Discredit the whistleblower. There's more, Olivia said, her voice dropping. Ryan Wilson is here in Asheville. Wilson, my old squad mate who told me about the property? Yes, he's been asking around about you at local motels. My friend spotted him showing your photo to the desk clerk at the place I was staying. The pieces clicked together in Max's mind with sickening clarity. He was never my friend. He was Hayes's plant. They wanted someone on that property who wouldn't ask questions. Who better than a traumatized vet looking for isolation? When I started finding Nathan's evidence, instead of hiding from the world, they activated Wilson to track me. Max, you need to... Olivia's voice cut off suddenly. Olivia! Olivia! Max called into the phone. The line was dead. Max tried redialing, but the call wouldn't connect. Either the satellite phone was malfunctioning or Olivia's phone had been compromised. Either way, he was on his own now, with Hayes's men behind him and an uncertain reception ahead. His only option was to continue north to the fire road and try to make it off the mountain before the net closed completely. He and Sentinel set off at a steady pace, the dog ranging ahead to scout the path. The terrain was becoming more difficult as they climbed higher. Rocky outcroppings and dense thickets of mountain laurel slowed their progress. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. A storm was brewing, which could be both blessing and curse. It would make tracking them harder, but would also make travel more dangerous. They reached a ridgeline just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. From this vantage point, Max could see for miles in every direction. The fire road was visible about 2 miles to the north, a thin line cutting through the forest. But something else caught his attention. A plume of smoke rising from the valley to the east, in the direction of his cabin. Max pulled out his binoculars and focused on the smoke. It wasn't his cabin burning. It was something much larger. The old logging camp they'd passed on their way up the mountain was engulfed in flames. They're destroying evidence, Max muttered grimly, burning anything connected to their operation. The rain intensified, driven sideways by gusting wind. Max and Sentinel took shelter under an overhanging rock, watching as the storm transformed the landscape into a gray blur. Thunder rolled across the mountains, followed by jagged forks of lightning. As they waited out the worst of the storm, Max reviewed everything they'd learned. The connections between Afghanistan, Project Raven, Hayes, and General Crane formed a disturbing pattern, a shadow operation hiding behind legitimate military research, using American veterans as unwitting test subjects for chemical weapons deemed too controversial for official development. The rain had slackened to a steady drizzle when Max noticed Sentinel's sudden alertness. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his gaze fixed on something downslope. Max followed his line of sight and saw a figure struggling up the rocky path toward their position. The person was limping badly, using a branch as a makeshift walking stick. Max drew the Glock, keeping it ready as the figure drew closer. Through the curtain of rain, he recognized the uniform of a Ravenwood County Sheriff's deputy, and then the face, drawn with pain but unmistakable. Frank Martinez. The deputy's uniform was torn and muddy, and a dark stain spread across his left thigh. As he neared the overhang, he spotted Max and raised a hand in greeting, or perhaps surrender. "Reynolds," he called weakly, "don't shoot, please." Max kept the Glock trained on him. "That's far enough, Martinez. What happened to you?" The deputy stopped, swaying slightly. "Hayes happened. He figured out I helped you, got the truth with his fists, then a bullet when I tried to run. He gestured to his bloody leg. Been tracking you since dawn. Knew you'd head for the fire road." "Why follow me? Why not go for help?" "Because there is no help," Martinez said bitterly. "Hayes has the state police convinced you're a domestic terrorist. And I'm now a fugitive too. Only chance we have is getting off this mountain together, with the evidence." Max hesitated. Martinez had helped them before, but this could still be a trap. "How do I know Hayes didn't send you to find me?" "You don't," Martinez admitted, "but I'm bleeding out, and we're both dead if we don't move soon." Hayes called in military support, not just state police. "There are helicopters on the way." As if to confirm his words, the distant thump-thump of rotor blades echoed across the valley. Max made his decision. "Sentinel, check," he commanded. The dog approached Martinez cautiously, sniffing the deputy thoroughly. If Martinez was carrying any electronic tracking devices, Sentinel would detect them. After a moment, the dog returned to Max's side, showing no signs of alert. "Come on," Max said, holstering the Glock. "Let's look at that leg." Under the shelter of the rock overhang, Max examined Martinez's wound. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his thigh, missing the major arteries, but leaving a nasty wound that had been bleeding steadily. Max used supplies from his first aid kit to clean and bind the injury. "This will hold for now, but you need a doctor." "Add it to the list," Martinez said through gritted teeth. Right after, "escape military manhunt, an exposed government conspiracy." Despite the gravity of their situation, Max found himself appreciating the deputy's dark humor. "What exactly happened after I left?" Martinez leaned back against the rock wall, his face pale from blood loss. "Hayes got a call early this morning. I was in the station when it came in. He took it in his office, but I could hear him getting agitated. When he came out, he ordered everyone to gear up for a major operation. Said we were bringing in state resources to capture a dangerous fugitive." "Me," Max said. "You and Reed's sister." "Hayes assigned me to the staging area at the Crest facility. That's when I overheard him talking to someone from the company. They were discussing a cleanup operation. Said they needed to sanitize all sites before the package arrives." "The package being General Crane," Max guessed. Martinez nodded. "I tried to slip away, maybe warn you, but Hayes caught me. Said he'd been suspicious for weeks. Had someone monitoring my calls." His face darkened. "He knew about my sister, knew I'd been helping Nathan Reed. He took me to his office, worked me over pretty good, then called 2 of his deputies in. Told them to take me to the old quarry and finish the job." "But you got away." "They underestimated how badly I wanted to live," Martinez said simply. "I managed to grab one of their guns during the drive, shot the driver in the shoulder, crashed the car. The other deputy got a round off as I ran, caught me in the leg. I've been moving through the woods ever since, trying to stay ahead of the search parties." The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, then faded as the aircraft moved to another part of the mountain. "They're sweeping the southern slopes first," Martinez observed. "Standard search pattern, but they'll be here soon." Max checked his watch. Almost 6 p.m. Darkness would fall within an hour, which would help conceal their movement but make navigation more difficult. "We need to reach that fire road before full dark," Max decided. "Can you walk?" Martinez grimaced but nodded. "Don't have much choice, do I?" As they prepared to leave their shelter, Max's satellite phone vibrated, a text message. "Unknown number," he murmured, opening it. The message sent ice through his veins. "They have Olivia coming for you next. R.W. Ryan Wilson, his old squad mate, the man who'd led him to this mountain in the first place. Was it a trap, a trick to flush him out, or was Wilson warning him?" "Bad news?" Martinez asked, noting Max's expression. "They've captured Olivia," Max said grimly, "and my old squad mate Wilson is somehow involved." "Wilson?" Martinez frowned. "That name was in Nathan's notes, something about Afghanistan connections." Max remembered the journal entry about veterans being recruited from VA hospitals. Was there a list of names, veterans they'd brought here for testing? Martinez thought for a moment. Yes, Reed had a partial employee list from Crest, mostly security personnel and medical staff, but there were some names listed as special consultants. Wilson might have been one of them. The helicopter sounds returned, closer this time. We need to move, Max said, helping Martinez to his feet. We'll sort out Wilson's role later. They set off through the rain, Martinez leaning heavily on his makeshift staff, Max supporting him on the steeper sections. Sentinel ranged ahead and behind, constantly alert for signs of pursuit. The going was painfully slow. What should have been a 2-hour hike stretched into 3 as they navigated the treacherous, rain-slicked terrain. Darkness fell, forcing them to use Max's small tactical flashlight sparingly to avoid detection. The fire road was tantalizingly close when disaster struck. Martinez's injured leg gave way on a slippery rock, sending him tumbling down a short but steep embankment. He landed hard, a cry of pain escaping before he could stifle it. Max scrambled down to him. How bad? Bad, Martinez gasped, clutching his leg. I think the bone's broken now. Max checked the injury. The fall had reopened the bullet wound, and a new deformity suggested a fractured femur. Martinez wouldn't be walking out of these mountains. Leave me, the deputy said, reading Max's thoughts. I'll just slow you down. Get to the road. Find help. Not happening, Max replied firmly. We go together or not at all. He fashioned a hasty splint from branches and torn strips of his shirt, then hoisted Martinez onto his back in a fireman's carry. It was awkward, painful for both of them, but it was their only option. Max staggered forward, each step an exercise in determination. Sentinel stayed close, understanding instinctively that his human needed protection now more than ever. The last half mile to the fire road was a blur of pain and effort. Max's world narrowed to the next step, then the next, his muscles screaming in protest, old injuries from Afghanistan flaring to new life. When they finally reached the gravel surface of the fire road, Max gently lowered Martinez to the ground, then collapsed beside him, gasping for breath. You stubborn bastard, Martinez panted. Should have left me. Not my style, Max replied between breaths. Marines don't leave people behind. Thought you were Navy SEAL. Same principle. They shared a brief, pain-filled laugh, a moment of camaraderie in the darkness. The moment was shattered by the sweep of headlights through the trees. A vehicle was approaching on the fire road. Could be Hayes, Martinez warned. Or it could be our ride, Max countered, thinking of the arrangement with Olivia's friend. Either way, we're out of options. He pulled the Glock, prepared for whatever came next. Sentinel positioned himself in front of the two men, a low growl building in his throat. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, rounded the bend and stopped about 50 yards away, its headlights illuminating the rain-soaked gravel. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out into the light. Max, you out there? Called a familiar voice. It's Ryan Wilson. We need to talk. Stay down, Max whispered to Martinez, positioning himself to shield the wounded deputy. Sentinel remained motionless beside them, his muscles coiled and ready to spring at the first sign of danger. I know you're there, Max, Wilson called, still standing in the glare of his truck's headlights. I'm alone. No weapons drawn. We've got about 10 minutes before Hayes and his goons figure out where I've gone. Max kept the Glock steady, trained on Wilson's silhouette. Where's Olivia Reed? That's what I came to tell you. Hayes has her at the Crest facility, the secure section on the north side. Why should I believe you? Max called back. Because I'm the one who told her to send you that text, Wilson replied. I've been undercover at Crest for 14 months. Deep cover. So deep that even my handlers at the FBI don't know everything I've been doing. Max felt Martinez tense beside him. FBI? Let me approach, Max, Wilson said. I'll explain everything. Max hesitated, then decided. Hands where I can see them. Move slowly. Wilson raised his hands and began walking forward, his steps deliberate. As he came closer, the details of his appearance emerged from the darkness. He looked different from the last time Max had seen him, thinner with a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A fresh cut marked his left cheekbone, and his knuckles were bruised and raw. Sentinel gave a low, rumbling growl as Wilson approached, but didn't attack. A warning, not a threat. That's far enough, Max said when Wilson was about 15 feet away. Start talking. Wilson lowered his hand slowly. After our last deployment, while you were still recovering in Germany, I was approached by FBI counterintelligence. They were investigating leaks of classified weapons research to foreign entities. The trail led them to General William Crane and a black site project called Raven. The chemical weapons testing, Max said. Wilson nodded. Initially authorized for limited development, then officially shut down when ethical concerns were raised. Except Crane never stopped. He just moved the operation off the books, setting up Crest Chemical as a front company. The FBI has been building a case against him for years, but could never get inside. So they sent you, Martinez said from his position on the ground. Wilson's eyes shifted to the deputy, noticing him for the first time. Martinez, you're alive. There was genuine relief in his voice. Yes, they sent me. My military background made me a perfect recruit for Crest's security team. I was supposed to gather evidence on the illegal weapons development, but what I found was much worse. The human testing, Max said. On veterans, Wilson confirmed grimly. Men who served this country, discarded when they came home broken, then recruited for paid medical trials that were actually weapons tests. By the time I discovered what was happening, Nathan Reed was already on their radar. He'd gotten closer to the truth than anyone. So you set me up, Max said, anger rising in his voice. Pointed me toward this property knowing what I'd find. Used me as a pawn. Wilson shook his head. Not at first. When the property came up for auction, I genuinely thought it would be a good place for you to heal. Somewhere quiet, away from everything. I had no idea how close it was to one of their testing sites. But you didn't warn me when you found out, Max pressed. I couldn't, not without blowing my cover. But when Hayes told me you'd found Reed's evidence, I knew I had to act. I've been trying to help from inside, feeding misinformation to Hayes about your location, delaying search parties. Max's finger remained firm on the trigger of the Glock. And Olivia, if you're such a helpful inside man, how did she get captured? Wilson's expression darkened. That wasn't supposed to happen. She met with my FBI contact in Asheville, handed over the evidence. But someone in the Bureau must be compromised. They walked right into a trap. Hayes's men took her about 3 hours ago. Is she alive? Max demanded. For now. Crane wants to question her personally about what evidence has already been shared. He's flying in at midnight. Wilson checked his watch. That gives us less than 5 hours to get her out. Us? Max raised an eyebrow. I've been building to this moment for over a year, Max. Everything I've done, every compromise I've made, was to bring down Crane and his operation. But I can't do it alone, not anymore. Wilson's voice took on an edge of desperation. This is bigger than either of us. They're not just killing homeless vets in some backwoods testing facility. They're preparing to sell these weapons to the highest bidder. Foreign governments, terrorist organizations, anyone with cash and a grudge. Martinez shifted painfully. Nathan had documents about international buyers, meetings in Eastern Europe, payments through shell companies. Wilson nodded. Crane's retirement plan. Sell the formulas, disappear with millions. Tonight is the culmination. He's bringing a potential buyer to see a demonstration. Max felt the cold weight of realization settle in his gut. Using Olivia as the test subject. Yes, Wilson confirmed. New compound, supposedly untraceable, mimics natural causes. Perfect for assassinations. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the trees surrounding them, the soft pattering the only sound as Max processed this information. Could he trust Wilson? The man had deceived him, used him, but his story aligned with everything they'd discovered. How do I know this isn't another setup? Max asked finally. Wilson reached slowly into his jacket, telegraphing his movements. Because of this. He withdrew a small metal case and opened it. Inside was a flash drive and what looked like an access card. Complete schematics of the Crest facility, including the secure section, security protocols, guard rotations, door codes, everything you need to get in and get Olivia out. He placed the case on the ground and slid it toward Max. And this, Wilson continued, removing his watch and placing it beside the case. GPS tracker. Connects to a secure server only my FBI handler can access. They've been monitoring my movements for months, building their case. The logs will show I've been at every key location, witnessed every crime. It's my insurance policy, and now it's yours. Max studied Wilson's face, looking for signs of deception. What he saw instead was exhaustion, determination, and something else. Shame. You knew about this when we were still in Afghanistan, didn't you? Max said suddenly, the pieces clicking into place. The mission that went wrong. My team that died. That wasn't a Taliban ambush. Wilson's face fell, the weight of an old burden visible in his eyes. They were testing an aerosol version of the compound. Remote valley, supposed to be uninhabited, except your team was sent in on a separate operation without proper coordination. They were gassed, Max said flatly. My men died because of friendly fire, chemical weapons tested by our own side. Crane covered it up, classified it as enemy action. That's when I knew I had to stop him, whatever it took. Wilson's voice was raw with emotion. I'm sorry, Max. I've been carrying that truth for years. The revelation should have filled Max with rage, but instead he felt a strange clarity. The nightmares, the guilt, the unanswered questions about how experienced operators could have been caught so completely off guard, it all made sense now. Martinez needs medical attention, Max said finally, lowering the Glock slightly. Broken femur, gunshot wound, significant blood loss. Wilson nodded. I've got a first aid kit in the truck, better than field dressings. And I know a doctor in Asheville who treats people off the books. Ex-military, trustworthy. And while Martinez gets help, what are we doing? Max asked, though he already knew the answer. We're going to Crest, Wilson said simply. We're going to get Olivia out and end this, once and for all. For the first time since arriving in these mountains, Max felt the fog of his depression lift completely, replaced by the clear, sharp focus of a mission. This was what he had been trained for. This was why he had survived when others hadn't. Sentinel, ease, Max commanded, and the dog relaxed his stance, though his eyes remained fixed on Wilson. Max stood, holstering the Glock. Let's get Martinez to the truck. Then you're going to tell me everything about that facility, every entrance, every guard, every security measure. Wilson nodded, relief visible on his face. Thank you for trusting me. I don't trust you, Max corrected him, but we want the same thing. For now, that's enough. Together, they carried Martinez to Wilson's truck, settling him in the back seat with improvised cushioning to stabilize his injured leg. The deputy was pale from blood loss and pain, but his eyes were clear. I should be going with you, Martinez said as Max checked his bandages one last time. You've done your part, Max told him. Now you need to get that leg treated before you lose it. Besides, I need someone to contact the authorities if we don't make it out. The real authorities, Wilson added. My handler's name and contact information are in the glove compartment. If you don't hear from us by dawn, call him directly. Tell him Operation Nightshade has gone critical. Martinez nodded weakly. Good luck. Make those bastards pay for Nathan and my sister. We will, Max promised, closing the truck door. Wilson handed him a set of keys. There's another vehicle stashed about half a mile down the road. Four-wheel drive, dark color, won't attract attention. I need to get Martinez to the doctor, then head back to Crest before they realize I'm missing. Meet me at the north perimeter fence at 2300 hours. Max took the keys. If this is a trap, Wilson. It's not, Wilson said firmly, but I understand your caution. That's why I'm giving you this. He pulled a small device from his pocket that looked like a remote detonator. Emergency transponder. Press this button, and every federal agency within 100 miles will descend on Crest within minutes. It's linked directly to the FBI's rapid response team. Why haven't you used it already? Max asked suspiciously. Because we need Crane himself, not just his operation. He has too many connections, too much influence. Without ironclad evidence and witnesses, he'll walk away clean. Wilson's expression hardened. I've spent 14 months building this case. Tonight's our only chance to get him with the buyers, the weapons, and the evidence all in one place. Max took the transponder, examining it briefly before tucking it into his pocket. 2300 hours. North perimeter. I'll be there, Wilson promised, then climbed into the driver's seat of his truck. The SUV is under a camo tarp just past the big lightning-struck pine. You can't miss it. As Wilson's truck disappeared down the fire road, its tail lights swallowed by darkness, Max turned to Sentinel. What do you think, boy? Are we walking into another trap? The dog tilted his head, amber eyes reflecting the faint moonlight now breaking through the clouds. Yeah, me too, Max agreed. But trap or not, Olivia needs us. And this ends tonight. He started down the fire road, Sentinel trotting faithfully at his side. The night had cleared after the storm, the sky opening up to reveal a tapestry of stars above the mountain peaks. The air was sharp with the scent of wet earth and pine, with an underlying metallic tang that might have been blood or simply the mineral-rich soil of the ancient mountains. Max found the vehicle exactly where Wilson had described. A dark green SUV hidden under a camouflage tarp beside a massive pine tree split down the middle by lightning. The keys fit, and the engine started with a quiet purr that suggested recent maintenance. Inside, he found more evidence of Wilson's preparation: a tactical vest with ceramic plates, a more comprehensive medical kit than the one he carried, night vision goggles, and a suppressed H&K MP5 submachine gun with spare magazines. He came ready for war, Max murmured, examining the weapon. It was clean, well-maintained, and loaded with subsonic ammunition, perfect for covert operations. There was also a satellite phone, newer and more powerful than the one he'd taken from Nathan's cabin, and a tablet computer. Max powered on the tablet to find detailed schematics of the Crest facility, exactly as Wilson had promised. He spent the next hour studying the layouts, committing key details to memory: guard stations, camera positions, access points, and, most importantly, the location of the secure testing facility where Olivia was likely being held. The more he reviewed the materials, the more convinced he became that Wilson was telling the truth, at least about wanting to bring down Crest. The intel was too detailed, too precise to be a simple trap. At precisely 22:30, Max started the SUV and began the drive to Crest. He followed secondary forest roads, avoiding the main access routes where Hayes might have set up checkpoints. The vehicle handled the rough terrain smoothly, its heavy-duty suspension absorbing the worst of the ruts and bumps. Sentinel sat in the passenger seat, alert and focused, his instincts honed by years of battlefield operations. Like Max, the dog seemed to understand that they were heading into danger, not away from it. They reached the vicinity of the Crest facility by 22:50, parking the SUV in a dense thicket about a quarter mile from the north perimeter fence. Max geared up quickly, donning the tactical vest, securing the MP5 across his chest and checking the Glock at his hip. Last came the night vision goggles, which he left pushed up on his forehead for now. "Ready, Sen?" he asked quietly. The dog gave a soft woof of affirmation. They moved through the forest with practiced silence, two shadows among many in the moonlit night. Max had disabled his phone and removed the battery from the satellite unit. No electronic emissions that could be detected. Only the emergency transponder remained active, a last resort tucked securely in his vest pocket. The Crest perimeter fence came into view, 10 feet of chain link topped with razor wire, illuminated at intervals by security lights. Max spotted 3 cameras covering this section, their sweeping patterns creating brief blind spots that a careful observer could exploit. He checked his watch, 22:58. Wilson should be arriving any minute. As if on cue, a figure materialized from the shadows about 50 yards to Max's right, moving with the careful precision of someone well-trained in covert movement. Wilson had changed into dark tactical gear, similar to Max's, his face partially obscured by a black cap pulled low. Max gave a low whistle, 2 notes, a signal from their shared military past. Wilson acknowledged with a small hand gesture and continued toward him. "Right on time," Wilson murmured as he reached Max's position. "Any problems getting here?" "None," Max replied. "How's Martinez?" "With the doctor. He'll make it." Wilson surveyed the fence line through compact binoculars. "Good news and bad news. Good news. Crane's arrival has been delayed by weather. His helicopter can't land until the fog clears from the valley." "And the bad?" "Hayes has doubled the security patrols. He's paranoid after Martinez's escape and—" Wilson hesitated. They've moved up the timetable on Olivia. They're prepping her for the demonstration now, even without Crane present. Max's jaw tightened. How long do we have? An hour, maybe less. The initial exposure is non-lethal, designed to show the progression of symptoms. But the full dose, Wilson didn't need to finish the sentence. Then we move now, Max said decisively. What's our entry point? Wilson pointed to a section of the fence partly obscured by overgrown vegetation. Maintenance access. The electronic lock is on a separate circuit from the main security system. I can bypass it without triggering alarms. They made their way to the access point, Sentinel following silently behind them. Wilson produced a small electronic device and attached it to the keypad beside the gate. After a few seconds, the lock disengaged with a soft click. Security patrol passes this section every 15 minutes, Wilson whispered as they slipped through. We have 9 minutes until the next one. Inside the perimeter, the facility loomed before them, a complex of low utilitarian buildings connected by covered walkways. Floodlights illuminated the main yard, creating pools of harsh light surrounded by deep shadows. Armed guards patrolled at regular intervals, and security cameras covered every approach to the buildings. Wilson led them along a drainage ditch that provided partial cover, stopping beneath a large ventilation unit that protruded from the side of the easternmost building. Maintenance tunnel, he explained, pointing to a service hatch at the base of the unit. Runs beneath most of the complex. We can access the secure wing without crossing the main yard. The hatch was secured with a padlock, which Wilson opened with a key from his pocket. They descended into a narrow concrete tunnel, barely high enough to stand in, illuminated at intervals by dim emergency lighting. The air was stale and carried the faint chemical smell that seemed to permeate everything associated with Raven Crest. Max pulled down his night vision goggles, which revealed the tunnel in eerie green clarity. Sentinel stayed close, his body language tense but controlled. The secure wing is about 200 meters ahead, Wilson whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of machinery that surrounded them. 3 guards at the entrance, key card and biometric access. I can get us through the first door, but after that, we'll need to improvise. They moved swiftly through the tunnel, passing junctions and access points marked with faded industrial signage. Pipes and conduits ran along the ceiling, occasionally dripping condensation onto the concrete floor. Stop, Wilson said suddenly, raising a hand. Listen. Above them, muffled by layers of concrete and insulation, came the sound of multiple footsteps and urgent voices. Someone was issuing orders, and others were responding with military precision. That's not a normal patrol, Max observed. Wilson's expression darkened. No, something's happening. He pulled out a small radio and tuned it to a specific frequency. After a moment of static, voices came through clearly. Raven Crest Security Communications. All units to high alert. Perimeter breach detected on the north fence. Possible intruder. Sweep all sectors and report. They know we're here, Max said. Wilson shook his head, confusion evident in his expression. That's impossible. We didn't trigger any alarms. The maintenance access isn't even on the main security grid. A cold realization settled over Max. Unless someone told them we were coming. Wilson's eyes widened. You think I don't know what to think, Max cut him off, but we need to move, now. They quickened their pace, the pretense of stealth abandoned in favor of speed. The tunnel began to slope upward, eventually ending at a metal ladder that led to another hatch. Wilson went up first, carefully pushing open the hatch and scanning the area above before signaling Max to follow. Sentinel came last, needing a boost from Max to reach the upper level. They emerged into a storage room filled with industrial shelving stocked with cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. A single bare bulb cast harsh shadows across the space. The secure wing is through that door, down the corridor to the left, Wilson whispered, pointing to a metal door with a small wire-reinforced window. But if they're on alert, it'll be locked down tight. As if to confirm his words, an alarm began to sound. Not the blaring siren of a general alert, but a steady, pulsing tone that indicated a security protocol had been activated. Wilson cursed under his breath. That's the internal lockdown signal. All non-security personnel are being moved to secure areas, which means fewer witnesses, Max noted grimly. Where would they be holding Olivia? Wilson pulled out a folded paper from his pocket, a more detailed schematic of the secure wing. Testing Chamber 3. It's isolated from the main lab areas with its own ventilation system, perfect for chemical weapon demonstrations. Max studied the schematic, quickly identifying potential approaches and choke points. Two ways in, main corridor and emergency exit. Both will be guarded. The emergency exit is our best bet, Wilson decided. Fewer personnel, and I can bypass the alarm on that door. Let's move, Max said, checking the MP5 one last time. Sentinel, close. The dog pressed against his leg, understanding the command to stay near in dangerous situations. They cracked open the storage room door and peered into the corridor beyond. It was empty, but the sound of booted feet and radio chatter echoed from somewhere nearby. Staying low and moving quickly, they made their way down the corridor, following Wilson's lead through the labyrinthine facility. Twice they had to duck into side rooms to avoid security patrols, holding their breath as guards passed within feet of their hiding places. The deeper they penetrated into the complex, the more sterile and clinical the environment became. Polished floors replaced concrete, and the walls were painted a stark, institutional white. Signs warned of biohazards and restricted areas, and security cameras became more frequent. Finally, they reached a heavy fire door marked Restricted Area, Authorized Personnel Only. Beyond this point lay the secure wing where Olivia was being held. Wilson examined the electronic lock, his expression grim. They've changed the codes. My access card won't work. Can you bypass it? Max asked. Not quickly. We'd need... Wilson never finished his sentence. From around the corner came the sound of a door opening, followed by voices, one of which Max recognized immediately. I want the demonstration ready when General Crane arrives, Sheriff Hayes was saying, his voice hard with authority. No excuses. The buyers are getting impatient. Max and Wilson pressed themselves against the wall, out of sight of whoever was approaching. Sentinel, sensing the tension, remained perfectly still. The subject is prepped and ready, replied a clinical, dispassionate voice. Initial exposure completed 20 minutes ago. First symptoms should manifest within the hour. Good. And what about our other problem? Any sign of Reynolds or Martinez? Security teams are still searching, but nothing yet. The mountain terrain makes it difficult. Hayes made a sound of frustration. Reynolds is military, special forces. He won't be found unless he wants to be. Double the patrols around the perimeter and put snipers on the roof. I want this place locked down tight. Yes, sir. The voices began to fade as the men moved away down an adjoining corridor. Once they were gone, Wilson turned to Max, his expression urgent. They've already started the process. We need to get to Olivia now. Those men have access to the secure wing, Max pointed out. We follow them, use them to get through the door. Without waiting for Wilson's agreement, Max moved silently in the direction Hayes and his companion had gone, Sentinel at his heels. Wilson hesitated only briefly before following. They tracked the men through a series of corridors, keeping just far enough back to avoid detection. Finally, they saw Hayes and a man in a white lab coat approach another security door. The scientist swiped a key card and pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner. The door unlocked with a heavy click. As the two men passed through, Max made his move. With a silent hand signal to Wilson, he surged forward, covering the distance to the door in seconds. He caught it just before it closed, holding it open a fraction of an inch. Hayes and the scientist continued down the corridor beyond, unaware of the infiltration. Once they had turned a corner, Max pulled the door open just enough for himself, Sentinel, and Wilson to slip through. They were now in the heart of Raven Crest's secure wing, the testing facility where Olivia was being held and where General Crane's illegal weapons program had flourished in secret for years. The corridor was stark and clinical, lined with laboratory doors marked with biohazard symbols and security warnings. Cameras covered every angle, their red recording lights glowing ominously in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Testing Chamber 3 is at the end of this hall, then left, Wilson whispered. But we can't just walk down there. Too exposed. Max surveyed their surroundings, looking for an alternative route. He spotted a maintenance panel in the ceiling about 10 feet ahead, likely access to the ventilation system or utility conduits. Up there, he indicated with a slight nod. Can we use that to bypass the cameras? Wilson studied the panel. Possibly. Those are service ducts for the electrical and ventilation systems. They might connect to the testing areas. Using a nearby cart for elevation, Wilson was able to reach the panel and carefully remove it, revealing a narrow crawl space above the drop ceiling. He pulled himself up, then helped Max lift Sentinel into the space. The crawl space was cramped and dusty, filled with cables, pipes, and ventilation ducts. They moved slowly, distributing their weight carefully to avoid making noise on the ceiling panels below. Following the main ventilation duct, they worked their way toward testing chamber 3. Through small gaps in the ceiling, they caught glimpses of the facility below. Scientists in protective gear, security personnel at their stations, computer banks monitoring unknown experiments. After several minutes of careful navigation, Wilson held up a hand to signal a stop. Below them was a large room divided by a glass wall. On one side, monitoring equipment and control panels. On the other, a hospital-style bed with restraints. And strapped to that bed, pale but conscious, was Olivia Reed. Max surveyed the scene below through a small gap in the ceiling panels. Olivia was secured to the bed with heavy restraints at her wrists and ankles. An IV line ran into her left arm, connected to a machine that was slowly dispensing a clear fluid. Despite her situation, she appeared alert, her eyes darting around the room, searching for any opportunity. 2 lab technicians in white coats monitored equipment on the other side of the glass partition, while a single armed guard stood at the door. From their elevated position, Max could see several more rooms connected to this one. A control center with multiple screens, a decontamination chamber, and what appeared to be a storage area for chemical compounds. "We need a distraction," Max whispered. "Something to clear that room." Wilson nodded, pulling a small device from his tactical vest. "Remote transmitter. I can trigger alarms in other sections of the facility. It won't fool them for long, but it might pull that guard away." "Do it," Max ordered, positioning himself above a ceiling panel that would give them access to the storage area, the least visible entry point. Wilson activated the device. Seconds later, alarms began blaring in a distant part of the complex. The effect was immediate. The guard's radio crackled with urgent commands, and after a brief exchange, he hurried from the room, leaving only the 2 technicians behind the glass. "Now, Max said, carefully lifting the ceiling panel and setting it aside. He lowered himself into the storage room first, landing silently on the balls of his feet. Wilson followed, then helped Sentinel down. The storage room was lined with locked cabinets labeled with chemical formulas and biohazard warnings. A single door connected it to the main testing chamber. Max peered through the small window in the door. The technicians were focused on their monitors, backs to him. He eased the door open just enough for Sentinel to slip through. "Security breach," Max whispered, the command triggering Sentinel's training for non-lethal threat neutralization. The dog moved with astonishing speed and silence, a gray shadow streaking across the floor. Before either technician could react, Sentinel had one by the arm, pulling him to the ground with enough force to stun but not maim. Max and Wilson burst through the door as the second technician lunged for an alarm button. Wilson intercepted him with a swift strike to the solar plexus that left the man gasping on the floor. "Zip ties," Max ordered, and Wilson quickly secured both technicians while Max muzzled them with duct tape. With the immediate threat neutralized, Max rushed to the inner chamber where Olivia was restrained. The door required a key card, which he took from one of the subdued technicians. "Max!" Olivia gasped as he entered, relief flooding her face. "I knew you'd come." "Are you hurt?" he asked, quickly working to release her restraints. "They've given me something," she said, her voice slightly slurred. "Said it was just the first stage. A demonstration." Wilson appeared beside them, examining the IV line and the machine it was connected to. "Initial compound, non-lethal dose, but it's the precursor to the weapons-grade agent." "Can you reverse it?" Max asked, freeing Olivia's last restraint. "Not completely, but I can slow it down." Wilson adjusted settings on the machine, then carefully removed the IV from Olivia's arm. "We need to get her to a hospital with the chemical profile. They'll have to synthesize an antidote." "I downloaded everything," Olivia said, her words becoming more difficult to form. "Chemical formulas, test results, sent them to my contact at the post." "Save your strength," Max said, helping her to sit up. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though her movements were unsteady. "Just dizzy, vision blurry." "I'll carry her if needed," Wilson said, "but we need to move fast. Hayes will realize something's wrong when that guard doesn't report back." Max helped Olivia to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved toward the exit. Sentinel led the way, alert for any approaching threats. Wait, Olivia said suddenly, pointing to a computer terminal. That system has everything, all their records. If we can copy it. Wilson was already moving to the terminal. She's right. This is their primary research database. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a specialized drive designed to rapidly clone data. 2 minutes. That's all I need. Max positioned himself by the door, MP5 at the ready, while Wilson worked on the computer. Olivia leaned against a counter, fighting to stay conscious as the chemicals in her system took greater effect. Almost done, Wilson muttered, eyes fixed on the progress bar on his device. The moment of relative calm was shattered by the sudden blare of a facility-wide alarm, different from the one Wilson had triggered earlier. This was the harsh, pulsing tone of a security breach alert. They know, Wilson said grimly, disconnecting his device the instant the download completed. We've got maybe 3 minutes before this place is swarming with armed security. Max made a quick decision. We can't go back the way we came. Too exposed. Is there another exit from the secure wing? Wilson nodded. Emergency evacuation route. Through the decontamination chamber, down a service corridor to an exterior door. It exits on the east side of the complex. Let's move, Max said, lifting Olivia into a fireman's carry when it became clear she couldn't walk steadily enough. Wilson, take point. Sentinel rear guard. They moved quickly through the decontamination chamber, which fortunately wasn't activated, and into a narrow service corridor beyond. The alarm continued to wail, and they could hear shouted commands and the sound of running boots echoing through the facility. The corridor ended at a heavy metal door marked "Emergency Exit Only. Alarm will sound." Since the alarms were already blaring, this was no longer a concern. Wilson pushed through the door, and they emerged into the cool night air on the eastern side of the complex. The area was a loading dock, currently deserted as all personnel had likely been diverted to internal security. The fence is just past those storage sheds, Wilson said, pointing to a row of metal buildings about 50 yards away. If we can reach it. He never finished the sentence. A spotlight suddenly illuminated them, its harsh glare momentarily blinding. From behind a parked truck stepped Sheriff Hayes, flanked by 2 armed security officers. All 3 had weapons trained on them. That's far enough, Hayes called, his voice cutting through the wail of alarms. Put the woman down, Reynolds. Max carefully set Olivia on her feet, keeping her behind him as he faced Hayes. Wilson stood frozen beside them, his hand hovering near his sidearm. It's over, Hayes, Wick said. We have everything. The chemical formulas, the test data, the financial records. It's already been sent to the FBI and the Washington Post. Hayes smiled, a cold, confident expression that never reached his eyes. I very much doubt that. You see, I've been one step ahead of you this entire time. He shifted his gaze to Wilson. Haven't I, Agent Wilson? A chill ran down Max's spine as he turned to look at Wilson, whose expression had transformed from tension to resignation. I'm sorry, Max, Wilson said quietly. It wasn't supposed to go this way. The betrayal hit Max like a physical blow. You set us up, all of it, the cabin, the evidence, Martinez. It was all to flush out Olivia and her contacts. Not all of it, Wilson replied, a hint of genuine regret in his voice. What I told you about Afghanistan was true, about our squad, about what happened to them. Enough reminiscing, Hayes interrupted. Reynolds, slide your weapon over here. Slowly. The dog stays where it is. Max calculated his options. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Olivia was weakening by the minute from whatever they'd injected her with. Even with Sentinel's capabilities, a direct confrontation would likely end badly. There was only one card left to play. As he slowly bent to place the MP5 on the ground, Max's hand brushed against his vest pocket, where the emergency transponder Wilson had given him was still secured. You know what happens now, Hayes continued, gesturing for one of his men to collect the weapon. General Crane arrives in less than an hour. He's very interested in meeting the people who've been interfering with his operation, especially Ms. Reed. Her demonstration will proceed as planned, with a few adjustments to the dosage. Crane won't risk exposure, Max countered, straightening up. Not with what we've uncovered. Hayes laughed. Exposure? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? General William Crane has connections at the highest levels of government. Anyone who might investigate will be shut down before they start. This facility will be classified as a matter of national security, and you three will simply disappear. Another tragic case of hikers lost in these dangerous mountains. As Hayes spoke, Max subtly pressed the button on the transponder in his pocket. If Wilson had been telling the truth about that, at least help would be on the way. If not, they were truly on their own. Secure them, Hayes ordered his men. Take them to holding cell 3. The general can decide their fate when he arrives. The security officers moved forward, zip ties ready. Max tensed, preparing for a last desperate move, when the night was suddenly pierced by the sound of helicopter rotors approaching rapidly. Hayes frowned, checking his watch. That's not Crane. He's not due for another 40 minutes. A powerful spotlight swept the area from above, briefly illuminating a black helicopter with no markings. Hayes and his men looked up in confusion, and in that moment of distraction, Max made his move. "Sentinel, take," he commanded. The dog lunged forward with explosive speed, targeting the nearest security officer. Simultaneously, Max threw himself at Hayes, tackling him to the ground. The sheriff's gun discharged, the bullet going wide. Wilson, whatever his true allegiance, didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon and engaged the second security officer, knocking the man's gun aside and delivering a precise strike to his throat. The helicopter descended rapidly, hovering just above the complex's perimeter fence. Men in tactical gear began fast roping down, their movements precise and practiced. Hayes fought with the desperate strength of a man who knew his life was on the line. He managed to get a hand free and struck Max across the face with punishing force. Max's head snapped back, but he recovered quickly, driving his knee into Hayes's midsection. "It's over," Max shouted above the roar of the helicopter. "Federal agents, stand down!" Whether they were actually federal agents, Max couldn't be sure, but the bluff worked. The security officer Sentinel had pinned "Stop struggling," and the one Wilson had engaged raised his hands in surrender. Hayes, however, had no intention of giving up. With a savage heave, he threw Max off and scrambled to his feet, drawing a backup weapon from his ankle holster. He swung it toward Max, fury distorting his features. A single shot rang out. Hayes staggered, a look of shock replacing the rage on his face. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then collapsed to his knees. Behind him stood Deputy Frank Martinez, pale and drawn with pain, his service weapon steady in his hands despite the makeshift splint on his leg. "That's for Nathan Reed," Martinez said, "and my sister." Max stared in disbelief. "Martinez? How?" "Wilson," Martinez explained, lowering his weapon as Hayes slumped to the ground. "He sent me coordinates, told me you'd need backup. I convinced the doctor to let me go." Max turned to Wilson, confusion evident on his face. "I don't understand. Whose side are you on?" Before Wilson could answer, the tactical team from the helicopter had reached their position, weapons trained on everyone. "Federal agents," the lead officer shouted. "Everyone on the ground, hands where we can see them." Max complied, carefully helping Olivia down beside him. Sentinel stayed close, tense but disciplined. "Agent Ryan Wilson, FBI counterintelligence," Wilson called out, slowly placing his weapon on the ground and reaching for credentials in his vest. "Authorization code Nightshade 739. The lead officer approached cautiously, examined Wilson's ID, then spoke into his radio. After a moment, his posture relaxed slightly. "Stand down, people. He's one of ours." He turned to Wilson. "Your signal came through loud and clear, Agent. Command said to tell you the package is secured." Wilson nodded, visible relief washing over him. "What about Crane?" "Intercepted 10 minutes ago when his helicopter tried to divert to a secondary location. He's in custody." Max looked between Wilson and the federal agent, pieces finally clicking into place. "This was your plan all along. Use the transponder to bring in your team, catch Hayes in the act." "Not exactly," Wilson admitted, helping Max to his feet. "The original plan was to wait for Crane to arrive, catch him and the buyers together. But when they accelerated the timeline with Olivia, I couldn't risk waiting." "So you're actually FBI?" Max asked, still processing the rapid turn of events. Wilson nodded. "Deep cover, like I said. But I couldn't tell you everything, not until I was sure you weren't compromised. Hayes had informants everywhere." Max's anger flared. "You let me think. That I betrayed you? I needed Hayes to believe it too. His men were watching us from the moment we entered the facility. If I'd tipped my hand too soon, we'd all be dead. Wilson's expression was earnest. I'm sorry, Max. I did what I had to do. Before Max could respond, Olivia collapsed against him, her condition deteriorating rapidly. She needs medical attention now, Max said urgently. They injected her with some kind of chemical agent. The lead federal agent immediately radioed for a medic, and within minutes, a helicopter medevac was arranged. As they waited, the federal team secured the facility, detaining Raven Crest personnel and seizing computers and documents. Will she be okay? Max asked as paramedics loaded Olivia onto a stretcher. The antidote is already being synthesized based on the formulas you sent, Wilson assured him. She'll receive it as soon as she reaches the hospital. The doctors are confident of a full recovery. Max watched as Olivia was carried to the waiting helicopter, Sentinel staying close by his side. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, leaving him drained but clear-headed. What happens now? He asked Wilson. Now? A lot of people go to prison. Raven Crest gets dismantled. The victims get justice. Wilson looked around at the facility that had housed so much suffering. And you go home, Max. Your part in this is done. Home, Max repeated, the word feeling strange on his tongue. The cabin in the mountains no longer felt like the sanctuary he'd sought. Too much had happened there. Martinez limped over to join them, his face gray with pain, but eyes bright with satisfaction. They found Nathan, he said quietly. Hayes kept records of everything. They buried him on the western slope, near where Sentinel wouldn't go that first day. Max nodded, understanding now why the dog had been so reluctant to approach that area. Even after a year, Sentinel had sensed what lay beneath the soil. He'll get a proper burial, Max promised, and his story will be told. The Washington Post is running the story tomorrow, Wilson confirmed. Full exposure of Project Raven, the illegal testing, all of it. Crane's political connections won't save him this time. Dawn was breaking over the mountains as Max, Sentinel, and Martinez were transported to the local hospital, the same facility where Olivia was being treated. The federal agents had assured them they would be protected. No one associated with Raven Crest or General Crane would be able to reach them. In the hospital waiting room, Max sat with Sentinel at his feet, waiting for news about Olivia. Martinez had been taken into surgery to properly repair his leg, and Wilson was coordinating with his FBI superiors about the ongoing operation. Mr. Reynolds? Max looked up to see a doctor standing in the doorway. Ms. Reed is asking for you, the doctor said. She's stable. The antidote is working. Relief washed over Max as he followed the doctor to Olivia's room. Sentinel padded quietly beside him, the dog's presence a constant comfort. Olivia was pale but alert, an IV in her arm delivering the antidote to the chemical agent she'd been exposed to. When she saw Max, her face lit up with a tired smile. There's my hero, she said, her voice weak but steady. Max shook his head. I think that title belongs to your brother. Without Nathan's evidence, none of this would have happened. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. They told me they found him, that I can finally bring him home. Yes, Max confirmed, taking her hand. It's over, Olivia. Raven Crest is being shut down. Crane is in custody. The whole operation is exposed. She squeezed his hand. And what about you? What happens to Max Reynolds now? It was a question he'd been asking himself. The peace and isolation he'd sought in the mountains had been an illusion, a retreat from life rather than a path forward. I'm not sure, he admitted. The cabin doesn't feel right anymore. Too many ghosts, Olivia said, understanding in her eyes. Too many secrets, Max corrected. But maybe that's not what I needed after all. Their conversation was interrupted by Wilson's arrival. The FBI agent looked exhausted but satisfied, the weight of his quanting undercover assignment finally lifting. I have news, he announced. The Washington Post just published the story. It's already being picked up by other major outlets. Crane's political allies are scrambling to distance themselves. The Pentagon has launched an internal investigation. It's happening, just like we hoped. And Hayes, Max asked? He'll survive, unfortunately, Wilson replied, but he'll spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. Same for the Raven Crest executives and the scientists who participated knowingly in the human testing. What about the land? Olivia asked. The contamination? EPA is already on site, Wilson assured her. Full environmental cleanup, funded by Crest's seized assets. It'll take years, but they'll restore the ecosystem. Max thought about the 40 acres he'd purchased, seeking solitude but finding purpose instead. Nathan's property, my property now, borders the Crest land. It could be part of the restoration. Or something more, Olivia suggested, a hint of her old spark returning. Nathan always talked about turning it into an environmental education center, a place where people could learn about the importance of protecting our wilderness. The idea resonated with Max in a way he hadn't expected. Not isolation, but purpose. Not escape, but engagement. I think Nathan would have liked that, he said. 1 year later, Max stood on the porch of the rebuilt cabin, watching as visitors made their way along the newly constructed nature trail. Sentinel lay at his feet, gray muzzle resting on his paws, enjoying the warm spring sunshine. The Reed Memorial Environmental Center had officially opened that morning, with Olivia cutting the ribbon in front of local press and community members. What had once been a hidden site of environmental crimes was now a place of education and healing. The Crest facility had been completely dismantled, its buildings razed and the land reclaimed by native plants. The cleanup was ongoing, but the progress was visible. Wildlife returning, streams running clear again. "Penny for your thoughts?" Olivia asked, joining him on the porch. Her recovery had been complete, no lasting effects from the chemical exposure. During the months of the center's development, she and Max had grown closer, their shared ordeal creating a bond that had gradually blossomed into something deeper. "Just thinking about how different things turned out from what I expected," Max replied. "I came here to hide from the world. Instead, you saved a piece of it," she finished for him. Max smiled, watching as a group of school children gathered around Martinez, now the center's head of security, as he explained the importance of watershed protection. Despite his permanent limp, the former deputy had found his calling educating others about environmental stewardship. Wilson visited occasionally, bringing updates on the ongoing fallout from the Crest case. General Crane had been convicted on multiple counts and would spend the rest of his life in prison. The exposure of Project Raven had led to reforms in military research oversight and new protections for veterans. Nathan Reed had been laid to rest in a quiet ceremony attended by environmental activists from across the country. His dog, Atlas, was buried beside him, their shared loyalty commemorated by a simple stone marker. "Do you ever miss it?" Olivia asked. "The solitude you came here looking for?" Max considered the question. The cabin was still his home, but now it was also part of something larger. A community of people working to protect and restore the land Nathan had died trying to save. "No," he said finally. "I thought I needed to be alone to heal. Turns out I needed a mission, a purpose." Sentinel raised his head, ears perking up at the sound of approaching footsteps. A moment later, a small group of veterans from the local VA hospital appeared on the trail. They were part of a new program the center had established. Nature therapy for those struggling with PTSD and other combat-related issues. Max recognized the look in their eyes, the same haunted vigilance he'd once carried. The same search for peace in a world that felt too loud, too chaotic. "I should go greet them," he said, straightening up. Olivia squeezed his hand. "You're good for them, you know. They see themselves in you, see that there's a way forward." As Max walked down the steps, Sentinel falling into step beside him, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He had come to these mountains seeking escape, a wall against the world built of silence and distance. Instead, he had found a different kind of peace, not in isolation, but in purpose. Not in forgetting, but in honoring. Not in walls, but in bridges. The land had indeed held secrets, dark and dangerous ones. But in bringing them to light, Max had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not just a place to heal, but a reason to. As he greeted the veterans, introducing himself in Sentinel, Max felt the weight of his past settle into something manageable. A part of him, but no longer the whole. The mountains still stood ancient and enduring around them, but now they sheltered hope instead of secrets. And in that hope, Max Reynolds had found his true sanctuary. The once abandoned cabin on the 40 acres of forgotten land had become something no one could have predicted. A beacon of truth, healing, and renewal, born from the courage of those who refused to let secrets stay buried. Nathan Reed's legacy lived on in the preserved wilderness and the lives saved by the exposure of Project Raven. Olivia had found closure and a new purpose carrying forward her brother's work. Martinez had found justice for his sister and so many others. And Max, who had come to these mountains to disappear, had instead found himself, not despite the darkness he'd uncovered, but because of his choice to face it. As the sun began to set behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the land that had once held so many secrets, Max knew with certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Not hiding from the world, but helping to heal a small corner of it. One veteran at a time, 1 acre at a time, one day at a time. The mountains would keep their remaining secrets, as mountains always do. But their shadows no longer harbored evil, and their silence was no longer charged with unspoken threats. Now it was simply peace, the real kind, hard-won and honest. And that, Max reflected as Sentinel leaned against his leg in quiet companionship, was worth everything.